right, how are we looking? That looks good. Hopefully it sounds good. Like that. I think this is working. Cool, well, I'm just gonna do some sound design by myself until somebody shows up. I need to reposition my push though. I think that'll be fine. Like that. Liking that so far. A little phaser on here. And a little bit of erosion couldn't hurt. Hey Anton, how's it going? I just started streaming a minute ago. I'm just doing a little bit of sound design. That kind of thing. Not really actually sure what else I should do here. Let's put this in a rack. Let's go ahead and save this as a preset. Yeah, I just was trying to figure out what I should do to start off today. But this is literally just the wavetable, 2 oscillators, some kind of weird wavetables, and just some LFO on the position, and using a notch filter here, and then mostly just a bunch of distortion at the end. So I got a pedal on the fuzz setting with sub turned on, a little bit of phaser, a little bit of chorus, a little bit of erosion, and a little bit of saturator. And it makes this nice kind of almost kind of like pseudo neuro kind of thing. That's what I was going for. This is often the kind of sound I'll start off with if I don't know what I'm going to be doing or making. I'll just make some weird noises like this and kind of see where it takes me. Let's put this filter a little bit. Yeah, it's not quite as heavy enough to be neuro, but it's kind of in the same range. But nothing fancy going on. How are you doing? What kind of stuff are you making? What kind of music are you into? What I was gonna do here? Let's toss some more effects on it, I guess. I'm gonna have to put the spectral time on this thing. Oh, techno, nice. I never really got super into techno, but over the last couple of years, it's definitely been growing on me. Nice. Yeah, I grew up on IDM. That was definitely the kind of genre that got me into making electronic music more than anything else. And definitely a lot of the stuff I still listen to is kind of in this weird kind of experimental, sometimes ambient, sometimes not ambient, dancey IDM kind of world. I don't know if this is the right effect for this kind of sound, but it sounds kind of cool. cool, but I don't know if that's quite what I'm going for. All right, so let's take that and let's actually make some beats to go with it. Just make something new. Hey Henry, how's it going? Thanks for being subbed, appreciate it. Yeah, I didn't get into Aphex Twin till later. Like I like circled around Aphex Twin for a long time before I actually listened to him. I kind of grew up in the like punk rock world, and then from punk rock into like noise music, like Japanese weird experimental noise music, and that into like breakcore / IDM stuff. But I like Venetian Snares is probably one of the artists that inspired me to make music more than around that time period to make electronic music specifically. Henry, this is the second time I'm doing a live stream here, so I don't really have a format or anything yet. So feel free to just like hop in and ask questions about anything you're interested in talking about. Oh no, I lost my kicks folder. Nice, yes. One of the reasons I wanted to do these streams is it actually gives me a time where I specifically have set aside where I'm just, for the most part, just working on stuff, because I will also get very distracted by other things in life. All right, I want the 808 boom. I'll take that guy. And then let's layer that with not one of those. I don't mind that guy. I think that'll be okay for right now. Let's slow this down a little bit and find a snare. I actually kind of like that one. What's been inspiring me musically recently? Let me ask you a question. A lot of Russian electronic music has been really cool recently. Ice Peak, there's a dude named Moa Pillar. Ice Peak's kind of a big deal now, but Moa Pillar is a bit more underground. And he makes a lot of weird ambient stuff, but also some kind of like almost techno-ish kind of beats too. A lot of just like random stuff I find on Spotify, like South American electronic music's been really cool, like Eastern European electronic music. China, like Sonia Calico out of China, or she might be from Taiwan, I forget. But a lot of like cool, weird stuff from underground scenes around the world is mostly what I've been listening to recently. I'll take this guy. My velocity is all over the place. Ice Peak is spelled IC and then the letter 3, PEAK, and MOA Pillar is MOA space PILLAR, I think. And they're both from Russia, as far as I know. Generally, I don't stick with the Ableton stock drums. My hard drive has been acting weird recently, and so normally I have my sample library in my places, and again, because my hard drive is being strange, it wasn't showing up here, so I just re-added my sample library back here, and you can see how there's this little circle is twirling. It's because it's re-indexing my sample library, which has all of my good drum samples in it. And so rather than just waiting for it to search through all my folder to re-index it, I just search through the live ones. But occasionally I'll use some live ones, like especially for the 808s and things like that are pretty basic. I'll use the live ones, not all the time, but some of the time. There's some hidden gems in there, but generally I'll get most of my drums off of Splice. Like once every couple weeks, I'll go through Splice and like download, 10 kick drums and 10 snare drums and 10 hi-hats or whatever, and kind of keep those in a special folder. Let's just quantize this whole thing. Yeah, like I said, you can find some good ones in there, and as you just saw, I layer all of my drums, so like just having one of these snares is probably not good enough. But when you layer 2 to 3 together, you can get some like pretty cool stuff out of it without really having to do a whole lot of work. Like the kick I'm fine with. I'm not in love with the snare yet, but it's enough that I can just get started and start tossing in a drum beat. And let me just find a hi-hat. Yeah, see, it's still not done indexing my sample library yet, so I'm just gonna have to go to my samples folder to find a hat. Or if I have to use live samples, I will use the some from the Beat Tools pack. This actually has some really good quality drums in it. Like this one, for example. Just the range here a little bit. I'm trying to get more into using the randomized velocity function for hi-hats because it makes my life super easy, but I always forget it's there. That's working okay. I want more hi-hats though. And let's toss in some 30-second notes here and here. All right, I'm liking that. Honestly, I haven't noticed like a huge difference between Live 10 and Live 11 in terms of my general workflow. There's a lot of really like small quality of life improvements that I'm actually like pretty into, but nothing that's like game changes and totally rearranges like how I do my productions. There's a lot of like little things that add up. Yeah, I think for some people, like if you don't use comping, if you're not into any of the new devices, and you don't like, if you do, or if you don't do any like generative stuff where you have like computer kind of, if you're not doing any generative stuff that where you let the computer do the work for you, then I don't think there's like a huge motivation to upgrade to 11. Like I think you could be fine on 10 and you're not missing out on a whole lot. But I really like it. There's a lot of stuff that specifically for me is really handy. I did a video on a lot of like hidden features, or top 5 hidden features or whatever, which are just like weird little things. Yeah, it's always the gear, or it's never the gear that's the issue. It's always the person behind the gear. Like some of the dopest tracks you've ever heard were made on a little tiny hardware thing on like headphones, and it has nothing to do with what the equipment did. It was entirely the person behind it. So, like I said, I think it's a worthy upgrade. I really enjoyed it, but I could, if people are like, you know what, I'm not into it, I can totally see that. It's really easy to be like, oh man, if I only had that new piece of gear, then I'd be the dopest producer ever. If I had that new synthesizer, if I had, whatever thing. But it's never the gear holding you back. It's totally true. It's all about creativity and doing what you can with what you got. It's a little too fast. Let me slow it down a little bit. Cool, that's working for me. Maybe a tiny bit slower. Cool, I'm digging that. Yeah, at least gives me something to work off, so when I'm writing this other part, it has something to go with it. That was okay. I'll hold on to that for right now. I think I do better than that though. I'm gonna tweak some of these settings a little bit. I feel like there's something about this sound I want to make a little tighter. Maybe a little better. Yeah, electronic music in the 90s is like totally something else. I love watching videos of like The Prodigy, for example, like Liam from The Prodigy. And he's like, oh yeah, I made this dope track using this little like hardware sequencer that's like that big. That stuff's super impressive to me. Like when I first started making electronic music, I did it all with hardware. Partially just because I just wanted to stay away from the computer, and it was expensive and it was time consuming, and it was just like you couldn't see anything. Like that's a big thing about live or any modern software is like you can see everything you're doing. You can see what this LFO looks like, or you can see what this wavetable looks like. And I'm a very visual learner, so being able to see all that info and like being able to see all the MIDI and all the audio all at the same time is just like makes your life so easy, or so much easier than it when I'll be using like, you know, a sampler where the screen is about like that big. We're like totally spoiled for choices when it comes to gear right now and what you can do with it. All right, so we're gonna take this and see. Working okay for me. Probably side chain that. Yeah, where's my splice folder? All right, so add a little something to go on top of this. I started making electronic music in like 2006 or so. But like I said, I spent the first couple years just purely on hardware. So like whatever piece of gear I could find at like a pawn shop, basically, or like a used, you know, sampler and things like that. And I performed all with hardware, produced all with hardware, tracked everything on hardware. And then I was working with some friends of mine who were using Live, and I was like looking over what they're doing, and I was like, that looks way easier than what I'm doing. So I started using Live in like probably like 2008 or 9 or so, but then like really kind of like fully got into it in like 2010. How about you, Henry? When did you start producing? Nice. That actually works really well. Nice. GarageBand's a good way to get started. I feel like that's where a lot of people kind of get into it at first. It's like the gateway drug for a lot of people is you start with GarageBand and then you're like, oh, I want more and I need more. And then you end up switching over to like Logic or Live or something like that. Henry, what kind of music are you into? What are you making? Also, just so I know, how does the volume of my voice sound compared to the volume of the music? Is that working out okay? All right, what am I doing next here? Let's put some effects on this guy. Okay, cool. All right, what do I put on this guy? We'll be big crush it. And what about a little bit of delay? Also, I'm totally just screwing around right now. If you guys have questions or topics or things you want to talk about, feel free just to chime in. Nice. Between hip hop and EDM is a good place to be, I feel like. I don't think I want any delay on that. Put a little bit of overdrive on this and see how it goes. Nice, that sounds fun. Do a little hip hop with synthesizers. Like, what kind of influences do you have? Like, what are some artists you really like, or that influence you? All right, what do we go from here? I guess I could do like a lead kind of thing. Yeah, the shape and jitter are kind of weird. So the jitter is basically going to add noise to the rate control here. So a good way to visualize it is if you ever use the Max for Live LFO, there's a jitter control right here. So like you're like sticking to this kind of like sine wave shape where it's like smoothly moving up and down. And if you add like a little bit of jitter, it still follows that same sine wave up and down, but it's going to like increase and decrease in this kind of like noisy way while also maintaining the shape. That I believe that's the same idea for the jitter here. There's not an LFO, it's not moving like that, but it's basically like if you had this set here and you turn the jitter up, it would be like shifting a little bit back and forth, left and right. So it adds like an extra layer of white noise on top of your downsampler. Yeah, kind of. And you don't really hear it as jitter, you literally just hear it as white noise. Like that. And the shape control, I understand how it works, but like how it behaves is a little strange. Essentially what I figured out through testing this and comparing it to the old Redux, the more this kind of adds like an envelope to it, and you're not gonna be able to hear it on something like this, but if we put this on like the drums, for example. Yeah, the new Redux is dope. Having the dry wet and the filter and all, like, makes it such a better device. But if we have something like this, if we take this and we turn it down to like, I don't know, 7, you hear it's like adding in all that distortion and noise. And as you turn this up, it's not that squelchy anymore. You don't get that same kind of like harshness. Here, like you still get that bit crushing, but you don't get the same like super high pitch part. And from my understanding, it adds like a little bit of like an envelope to it. So instead of like always being exactly at 7 bits, it kind of like smoothly jumps up and down a little bit. So it like adds a little bit of kind of curve to the amount of bit crushing you're getting. I don't know if that's 100% correct, but that's the way I perceive it, at least. And if you are used to using the old Redux in Live 10, having the shape at 100% behaves a little bit more like it does in Live 10, if I'm not mistaken. I did a whole video on this, but it was a long time ago, so I'm trying to make sure I'm giving you the right information. But it makes it a little smoother. Whereas here's like a bit more kind of like squelchy and weird. But yeah, they're both kind of strange controls. They're both not super impactful in my opinion in terms of like how I'm using the Redux. But having the filter here is amazing for doing like interesting filter sweeps. Really awesome. Yeah, there's a bunch of devices that need like some little tiny updates that would be really, really handy. Grain delay is definitely one of them. What are other ones that need some updates? There's already a million ways to do distortion. I'm so happy they had a hybrid reverb because the live reverb was just not cutting it for me. The vocoder is the one that needs to update the most. I think the vocoder has so much potential and you can do some really cool stuff with it, but it's such a pain in the ass to try to make this sound good. That's on my wish list for Live 11.1 or 2 or 12 or whatever, whenever they get around to updating the vocoder, because it's not quite there yet. You can do some fun stuff with it, but it doesn't do all the things I want it to do and all the things I need it to do. That would be my number one candidate for an updated device, probably more than anything else. Yeah, it's definitely not intuitive, especially because it defaults to the white noise setting, which always makes everything sound terrible. Actually, that actually sounds good. This is the first time the noise settings ever made something sound good. What's up, Giovanni? Welcome. How's it going? Yeah, grain delay I love, but it suffers from some more design flaws than anything else. Like it does lots of cool stuff. It just the way the XY controller is kind of strange. All right, so dynamic tube I think is really fascinating because I have a really love-hate relationship with dynamic tube. And it took me forever, like literally like years and years to really figure out why I hate dynamic tube so much. And the reason dynamic tube is so tricky to use is that, because I think it can sound really good. I think dynamic tube, if you get the settings right, is one of the best sounding distortions in Live. but you have to get the settings just right. But essentially, the key is the word dynamic in Dynamic Tube. When you hear the word dynamics, think volume. So if you have a sound that is quiet going into Dynamic Tube, no matter what you do to the settings, like if I had like a piano running into Dynamic Tube, where'd that tube go? And if the piano is quiet, it doesn't matter what you do here. It all like doesn't do anything interesting. I mean, the bias will screw it up, but like we don't get distortion here, even with the drive turned up to plus 15 decibels. So in order for the Dynamic Tube to actually really work and actually sound good, the volume going into the Dynamic Tube has got to be really loud. So I could crank the volume here, and that probably, only if I'm playing higher velocities will it do something, whereas lower velocities, there's no distortion. So it responds very specifically to volume. So quiet volumes going into Dynamic Tube, no matter what you do, not going to do anything. But if you were to like crank the volume going in here with like a utility, you actually get the distortion out of it. Yeah, the envelope knob is basically going to be like using the attack and the release controls here to make the amount of the Dynamic Tube either go up over time or and fade out over time. But the real key here is getting the tone and the bias correct. So generally, I crank up the drive almost no matter what, just so I get enough volume going in so I actually get distortion. But if you're like getting a little bit, if you're going for like a almost kind of like a lo-fi vinyl, like recorded in the 1940s kind of sound, Dynamic Tube can actually work really well. And then if we tweak too much bias and just destroys it. But if I didn't have this extra 12 decibels, 21 decibels going in here, this doesn't do anything. So you gotta make sure you crank the volume going in. And you can actually get some cool tones out of this, or cool distortion. These ABC modes are really confusing to me because in the manual it says that A mode is the cleanest and C mode is the dirtiest, and then B is somewhere in between. But generally when I use it, it seems like it goes the opposite way. They all have kind of like different qualities though. But basically, if we have something like this, and we have like an attack of 400 milliseconds, it's probably too long. Let's make this a little lower. You're still not like really getting a whole lot out of this. So like here, if our attack is really low, our distortion's just happening instantly. But if this is turned up, it kind of like fades it in. But no matter what you do, it's pretty subtle. Like you don't like the envelope here doesn't make a huge difference. It kind of reminds me a little bit of like the envelope on the vocoder, for example. You have an attack and release here, and then you have the amount here, which is going to control basically as a percentage, multiply your attack and your release. There's a few other devices that have like attack, release, and then an envelope amount like that. Yeah, autofilter is another one. There's a handful of them, and most of the time when they do envelopes like that, I'm not a huge fan. Like it doesn't do a whole lot. Like if you're using the autofilter, the envelope control here doesn't change it hugely. It does a little bit with autofilter. Like it's working, but it's just not working a whole lot. Yeah, it's like subtle motion. The envelope here actually is really useful if you're going to be sidechaining. on your auto filter though. And then this actually really helps. But yeah, that's the dynamic tube. The thing that makes the dynamic tube work or not work is making sure you have the correct volume going in, because you have too much volume going in, you get too much distortion. And if you have not enough volume going in, you have not enough distortion. So finding that middle ground can be kind of tricky, but it can be really nice on sounds that are really dynamic, where you have some parts that are louder than others, and that allows you to kind of get like different amounts of distortion on different sounds as just part of the performance of what you're doing. So again, if you're going for like a lo-fi piano sound, it can be really handy because I can play notes softly and it's super clean. But if I play a note harder, you actually get distortion. So it can make a dynamic performance and really kind of like bring out a lot of the dynamics of that performance by doing something like that. But probably one of my least favorites of the distortion options you have in live, because there's like 12, there's like 8 different distortion effects, and this is probably one of my bottom 2 distortion, because all the other ones just are easy and they always sound good, and you don't have to do a lot of work to make it actually do something. This is a good question though. Dynamic tube is an interesting one. Let's get to vinyl distortion in just a second. So, is it Keelan? Keelan, welcome. So, the reason drums can sound really huge, like a drum sample can sound really huge in the sample library, but not when you load it up, is, hold on, let me, yeah, so the default volume is -12. Let me just find a kick drum. Give me a good kick. Something like this. Yeah, so it starts at -12. So if I toss this in here, the volume here is at -12. And the reason it's at -12 is because it's by default velocity sensitive. So if I hit it at like a medium velocity, that's the wrong one. It sounds okay, but it's not nearly as loud as it was inside of the browser. But if you hit it at the maximum velocity, it's going to be just as loud as it would be in the sampler, because maximum velocity is going to be the full volume essentially. So if that's bothering you, you could take velocity sensitivity off and then turn the volume up here. If you keep the velocity sensitivity on and you turn the volume up, that means you're probably going to be clipping if you hit it at a really high velocity. So you have to watch out for that a little bit. My computer's acting weird. Everything is still all right? Hopefully. But yeah, that's why simpler is a little quieter. Or when you go in to plug in your MIDI notes, just make sure you plug them in at maximum velocity, and then that'll be as loud as you can get. Cool. So vinyl distortion is kind of interesting. I always think of the erosion and vinyl distortion as being kind of like 2 different approaches to a really similar idea. And let's put this back on my grand piano over here. So erosion, there's 3 different modes. There's noise, wide noise, and sine. Sine is a little different. It adds this very kind of like digital kind of distortion, whereas noise and wide noise are basically the same thing. And you can control the amount here, and the frequency here, and the width here. So it adds this like a little bit of fuzziness to everything. The vinyl distortion is really kind of the same thing, except for it's kind of divided up into 3 different parts. The first part is just these 2 knobs right here, and these are totally separate from everything else. This is the crackle. I'm sure you've played around this before. You turn it up, it makes a like vinyl crackle, and you can control the density here to make it a lot or less. This thing is really annoying because it always plays whether your song is playing or not, or any audio is burning through it or not. So I tend to not use that. If I do want to get that kind of vinyl crackle, I will actually just take this and resample it and re-record it. All right. Can anybody hear me now? Still nothing? What happened? Oh, you can hear me? Sick. All right, cool. Sorry about that. I have no idea what happened. I'm blaming it all on OBS because that's usually what causes most of my problems in my life these days. Sweet. Cool. So how much of talking about vinyl distortion did you hear? Was that, I don't know when the audio cut off, so I can restart talking about vinyl distortion. Also, everybody else who is just entering the stream, welcome. I'm just kind of hanging out and talking about music stuff, so feel free to ask questions or talk about whatever it is you want to talk about. But I don't know how long I was blabbing on for with a microphone that was not working. Okay, cool. Yeah, so crackle just makes noise. And then tracing model is going to also, like I said, act very similar to erosion, where if you turn up the amount, let's make the width a little wider. This also is going to need, I think, a little bit more volume to actually be heard. So let me crank this up a little bit. Or just do this. There we go. So it adds this really kind of like subtle distortion. It's not quite as noisy as erosion, but it does add this like a little bit of crispness to it, and you can kind of choose which frequencies you get that on. So it's a little more subtle than erosion, but so it adds this kind of like lo-fi quality. And then pinch is going to be a little bit more noisy. Well, that's way loud. Let me turn that down a little bit. Like that. And then you can mix the two of them together. So we have frequency, we have bandwidth, and we have them both turned on at the same time, maybe in slightly different places. And this is a drive, and if I'm not mistaken, this drive applies to both the pinch and the tracing model, so it goes to both of them. So more drive means more distortion. So it's not quite a dry wet, but you can kind of use it like one. So if you're looking to kind of like subtly degrade things in this like very old school noisy kind of way, this is probably what I'd go for. It tends to work on sounds that are already pretty clean. Like I'm using a piano specifically because it starts off as a very clean sound. Whereas if you put this on like a really heavy bass sound that already had a bunch of distortion, you probably wouldn't really notice it too much. It's not going to do a whole lot for you, at least in my experience. Whereas using something like the erosion is super obvious, so I definitely would put this on like a heavy bass sound if I was going for like a bit more of the like kind of like noisy, gritty, bassy kind of thing. And then obviously crackle is super annoying. But yeah, that's kind of the difference is between those. Any other questions about vinyl distortion or just other distortion in general? Distortion, there's so many different ways to do distortion in live. I think the programmers at live are just like always looking for more ways to add distortion, so they give you tons of options. Everybody still there? Am I still, you still hear me? Cool. Yeah, I was gonna make this guy. Wrong one. And again, I'm just going to be kind of screwing around making stuff. And if you guys have questions you want to ask or topics you want to talk about, feel free to just toss it in the chat. Also, feel free to let me know, like, where you're from, what kind of music you're into, that kind of thing. I think it's always interesting to kind of hear, because this is the internet, what kind of music people are into, because I think I'm in Colorado and there's a certain style of music and electronic music that people tend to be into, or there's 2 or 3 styles people tend to be into. So I'm always curious if people from other parts of the world, what they're into and what is inspiring them right now. This needs to be a little bit more gritty, I think. A little bit less over here. There's one good one in there. Not good enough. that'll work, I think. All right, let's take this and see what happens if I chop it up. Um, 87 is just like that perfect middle ground between, like, I don't know, you can do a lot at 87. I think 90 is actually probably my favorite BPM, but there's a lot of good things to say about 87. I mean, you can do a lot of hip hop down there, a lot of like bass music you can do in 87. It's just like it's this nice middle ground between all the things that I love the most. Probably is why I like it. Although honestly, 90 is usually 90, 85 to 105 is really the sweet spot, I think, for me. All right. Can you guys hear me now? Testing, check 1, 2. Any audio yet? Nope, no audio. Okay, it's working. All right, yeah, it's something. My computer will hiccup, like it'll freeze for a second, and then you guys lose audio, and I have no idea what causes it. I hope it's not too much going on for my computer right now. We'll see. That's partially why I'm doing these as a kind of a test stream. You guys are my guinea pigs to make sure this whole thing works. So I'm gonna go ahead and save this guy. Just because I'm worried there's too much going on here. Say the 9th. As far as file management, do you mean like sample library file management or project folder file management or all of the above? Because yes, I have lots of file management things that I do, methodology I use for file management for everything. It's super, super important in my opinion. Probably the first piece of advice I would give you is make one folder, and inside that folder put everything music related. So your sample library is going to go in there. Your live packs are going to go in there. I can actually, let's go ahead and just do an example. So for example, on the desktop, we're going to have our generic music folder, and inside the music folder, we're going to put sample library. And I will usually put my splice folder inside the sample library. So I'll have like a, oops, splice will go in there. And then anytime I download stuff from places other than splice, everything goes in the sample library folder. And that way it's all in one place and I don't have it spread out all across my computer. My live packs folder would go in here. Interesting. So keeping a sample library inside of your user library, I think potentially could cause some issues down the road. Maybe. Most likely it'll be totally fine. Probably 99% of the time I think it's totally fine to do. The only situation where I would consider not having, it would be better to not have your sample library inside your user library, is if you go in here and you hit, where is it? Manage files. You can manage your set, you can manage your project, and you can manage your user library. So managing your user library, if you hit on this, it's going to go through and it's going to index all the files in your user library, which if you have a huge sample library in there, is going to take forever. And when you're in here, it's basically the same thing, options you get when you hit like manage project. So it'll show you like how many sets there are, how many clips, how many presets, how many MIDI files, all the kind of important information about your user library, including things like unused files. So if you have a bunch of unused files in your user library, you can like delete those or kind of like get rid of them or whatever. But if you have your sample library there, there's probably tons of unused files in your sample library that you'll just never ever use. So I think the only situation where that would ever really screw you over is if you wanted to use the manage user library function, but generally people don't really need to do that. It's usually not a huge deal. So I keep my sample library and my user library separate, but I could see that there'd be arguments potentially for doing that. But yeah, I'll have my user library over here. I'll have like a DJ folder for like when I'm DJing stuff inside of Live. And then I'll have a folder for live projects. So anything that I make is going to go in the live projects folder basically. And inside the live projects folder is going to be like a remixes folder. And there's going to be a collaboration folder. And then maybe there's going to be like a for hire folder. So if you are getting paid to make something, whether it's for like a commercial or a TV show or a video game or movie or whatever, you're, like somebody's paying you to make something, I put those in a special folder so that way if I have clients, I always know exactly where to go to get that kind of stuff. And then I'll have my like, I usually organize mine by albums. So like I'll have albums that I'm working on. And then everything will go in here and I'll kind of organize it depending on which album I'm working on at the time. But this is kind of like a generic example of kind of like what my one folder is. And that way when I back it up, I just have to back up that one folder and it's got all of the important stuff all right in there. Yeah, I don't make any big sample library changes. Like things go in the sample library and then they stay there, and that's all I need to do. And I just migrated to a new computer, so I haven't been going back to old projects yet to see kind of what stayed and what didn't. But this has worked for me pretty well for years. And I generally like the sample library right now is living on an external hard drive. So if I need to go to a different computer, I just plug it in and all my sample library stuff is still there, and it should still be able to find it because it's still drive name and then sample library for the location. And then when I'm actually saving projects, I have like a whole naming system that I use for saving projects. Yeah, once I find that everybody who has their kind of yeah, that's I have a whole class. I have a whole 2-hour class that I do purely on file management, and it is not the most exciting topic, but it is definitely one of the most important topics out there. Like, if you want to be a professional in the audio world, or you want people to pay you for music, whether it's again you're doing soundtracks for video games or movies or whatever, or just making music professionally, if you don't organize your files, then at some point that's gonna screw you over big time. Like if you're relying on music and audio to pay your rent and get bills paid, your files need to be super tight because if a hard drive crashes and you don't have backups, or you're working on a project for a client and you accidentally delete it, it's like then you don't get paid, and like that really screws you over. Or the example I always use is say you rent out studio time, that you go to like a studio with somebody else, like a vocalist, and you're producing a song and they're singing vocals, and you're paying $100, $200, however many dollars per hour to use that studio space. If you have to spend the first 20 minutes of your time there trying to find the right project, then you just wasted time, and not only did you waste money, but you also look bad in front of people you're trying to collaborate with and people you're trying to like build a creative relationship with. So getting your file management down is so important to kind of making that move from an amateur to a professional in the audio world. And like, yeah, it's not that exciting, but it's the thing that'll, to me, makes all the difference in the world. And it'll save you time too in the long run. If you have a good system for organizing your files and you stick to it and you like regularly like take care of it, you will save hours and hours in the future from having to find files and all that kind of stuff. Does that kind of answer your question? Hopefully. And then I also have a folder for my live performance. Because my live performance set is different than my DJ set. So I have separate locations for those. Yeah, not the sexiest of topics, but really, really important. Cool. Anybody else out there besides Henry? Maybe it's just you and me now, Henry. Wait, well, I'm going to keep on just screwing around with this sound. I'm not sure if I like the choppy. All right, hopefully that worked. Am I still here? Testing, check 1, 2. Cool. Yeah, this is my second time streaming on YouTube, and last time it worked pretty well, and then today, randomly, my microphone has just stopped working. So I'm not really sure what's going on with it. The microphone works fine. It's somewhere in between my streaming software and YouTube. Audio is just stopping for whatever reason. And that's like the third time today I've had to reset it. So hopefully that doesn't keep happening. Hopefully it looks good and sounds good. Jennifer, how you doing? Feeling good today? You doing fine? What's Friday afternoon, so hopefully you have a good weekend ahead of you. All right, testing. Should be back in business now. Hopefully. Henry, if you can hear me, thanks for showing up, having lots of good questions. I'll see you again next time. I'm going to try to keep doing this regularly, again, provided my gear all works. And try to do it on, I think, Tuesdays and Fridays. I think are the days I'm going to do it. I'm not exactly sure what time yet, but that's going to be the potential schedule for the future. So feel free to stop by it anytime you want. Jennifer, you said you're in Kenya right now? That's dope. We had somebody in the other day who was from South Africa, which is pretty sick. What's the music scene like in Kenya? I know there's a Kenyan band that's really good. I think they're called Just a Band is the name of them. I think they're a big deal in Kenya, but I'm not actually sure. But other than that, I don't really know what the music scene is like in Kenya. I'm a little worried to start making music again because I think this project is what's causing my audio issues. Oh, nice. Interesting, reggaeton and dancehall fusion. What artist do you think I should check out from that style music? I'm super into music from different parts of the world, so I'm really curious what people are making out there. And like I said, I'm gonna try playing this one more time. I'm pretty sure it might kill my audio. If my audio goes out again, I'm probably gonna call it for today. This is about as long as I was planning on streaming anyway. But the audio dropouts have been driving me crazy. But this is what I was working on during the stream as people were asking me questions. All right. Now it should be back, audio, hopefully. I apologize about that. It's my computer is freaking out, and I'm not quite sure what's causing that. So I'm gonna have to do some testing to figure out what the issue is. It's definitely the music that is causing. Yeah, I know how to fix it, and I know when it happens, but I don't know what's causing it. So that's gonna be a fun project for me this weekend, just to try to figure out what is going on with my either microphone or interface or streaming service. But to answer your question about how do I know what to put my levels at, mostly it's intuition. It's mostly just kind of like what I feel things should be. I try not to screw with the volumes a whole lot when I'm producing. Like I'll get like rough values, kind of like roughly where I want it to be, but I'll save a lot of the controlling volumes to the mixing stage, and that's when I'll really focus on it. So when I'm producing, try to focus on producing. Don't stress too much about volumes. Get them roughly where it would be, and then once you move into mixing, that's when you really want to like dial in the volumes to be just perfect. Hey, keep calm with music. Awesome, glad you're enjoying the videos. I'm trying to just pump out a lot of content right now, and I really appreciate it when people are enjoying it. So that definitely helps motivate me quite a bit. So thank you. But as far as knowing where to put the levels, the technique that I always use and that I tell people to use is close your eyes as you listen to music and notice where your brain is going. Notice the sound that is grabbing your attention the most. Usually that's the loudest sound. Our brains are kind of engineered to focus on whatever sounds are the loudest. It's like a survival thing. If you're like in the woods, loud sounds, would be something you need to pay attention to. So listen and focus on whatever grabs your attention the most, and then ask yourself the question, is that what I want my audience to be focusing on? And the answer to that question is going to vary a lot depending on what kind of genre you're into, what genre you're making. So if you're making like electronic music, generally the most important thing is going to be either the kick drum, because that's how people are going to dance to it, or the vocals if you're doing music with vocals. And then the second most important thing is probably going to be the bass or the snare. And then maybe the third most important thing is the percussion, and then maybe the chord progression, or melody is probably up there with snare. And then maybe chord progression after that, and then I don't know, background sound effects, things like that. So there's a priority system where certain sounds are more important than others, and the way you tell that is by listening and trying to pick out each sound individually, and then again, like I said, close your eyes, listen, think about what sound's grabbing my attention the most, and then really focus on listening and think about what sound is grabbing my attention the second most, and then third most, and then you'll be able to hear each sound individually in terms of whatever the loudest sound is to the least loudest sound. Then as you're mixing, use your volumes to kind of turn things up and down in terms of what you think is more important and what you think is less important. So if you notice your drums are a little bit too loud, you obviously turn down a little bit. If you notice the vocals need to be up a little bit, turn them up a little bit. But it's all kind of a priority system based off of how you want to direct your listeners' attention. So those are kind of the questions that I ask myself when I'm mixing, and I encourage people to ask themselves when they're mixing. When I'm producing, it's mostly just kind of instinct. Whatever sounds good is fine. You don't need to be perfect about adjusting levels when you're producing. You kind of say that for when you're mixing. Does that answer your question? Hopefully that's useful. And the more you kind of like listen to songs and like produce music, the more you can kind of like pick out like, oh, there's a certain sound that's too loud, or there's a certain sound that's too quiet, and then you just go in and you kind of adjust it to taste from there. The other thing that really helps is when you're producing, you can see a lot of my volumes are down at like -12 decibels. The reason I do that is so I have lots of headroom. So that way, if I need to turn things up, I can. If everything is already at 0 dB, then I can't turn anything up from there because everything is already as loud. Like if everything's up here at 0 dB and I need my drums to be louder, I can't because it'll start clipping. So I generally work with about 12 decibels of headroom when I'm producing, so that way I can turn things up and down as I need to. Yeah, what's the other question you got? Keep calm. Feel free to pop any questions in the chat if you have anything you want to talk about. By producer block, you just mean like writer's block? You're just feeling stuck on things? That is a fantastic question. I have probably spent more than my fair share of time struggling with writer's block and feeling stuck in many ways throughout my musical career. The big thing for me personally, is there's two things probably. Yeah, lack of inspiration. The thing that I do is I put a lot of pressure on myself. I'm a perfectionist, so I like if things aren't perfect, then I get really frustrated. So one of the things that has helped me is to stop thinking about the destination and only focus on the process. So instead of being results oriented, be process oriented. So just focus on the act of creation and don't get yourself attached to a specific result. Whether that's having an amazing song when you're done, or whether that's getting 20,000 plays on Spotify, or whatever result your brain is attaching to the song or the thing you're making. Try to remove yourself from that and just focus on just like, okay, today I'm just going to make some stuff and remove myself from what the result is going to be. Just focus on the actual process of making something and take the pressure off of it. The song doesn't really need to be anything. Like, it doesn't need to be perfect. It doesn't need to be finished. It's mostly about you as an artist learning and growing along the way. And even if the song you're working on, you never finish and it sucks and it fails horribly, then you learned something along the way. Like, you learned a new technique, or you tried something out, or you like went beyond your comfort zone. So that really helps me. The other thing that really helps me, and this is more of like a technique, is restrictions. Adding creative restrictions to yourself, applying your own creative restrictions, is massively valuable. And there's lots of different ways to do this, because when you're making music now, you have infinite choices, right? You have infinite plugins, you have infinite effects, you have so many things you can do, infinite genres you can do. How do you pick anything? So if you work with restrictions, you can actually make yourself more productive and more creative. So for example, if you are always making house music, try making music in a different genre, or make music in a different tempo. Or the big one that helps me a lot is really heavy time restrictions. So when you sit down to write a track, put on a timer for like an hour or an hour and a half or 2 hours. And once that timer is done, the song is done. You're not allowed to work on it anymore. So instead of sitting there and like humming and hawing and trying to make decisions, you have a deadline that's like really obnoxiously fast, like really, really fast. And that way you sit down and like, okay, first 10 minutes are gonna be my drums. They're done. Next 10 minutes is gonna be my bass. Okay, that's done. Next 10 minutes is gonna be my chord progression. Boom, that's done. And then, the last 10 minutes last 15 minutes is gonna be like mixing and mastering. So it forces you to kind of like your brain to go into kind of like overdrive mode, where you're just like, okay, decisions, decisions, decisions. And at the end of an hour and a half or 2 hours or however long you give yourself, the song's not done. Who cares? It was just a 2-hour project you're working on, or an hour-long project, or an hour and a half long project. But at the end of 2 hours, like, you know what, I actually like this. You can keep working on it, and you can go back in and update it and finish it. So really strict time restrictions are really helpful. Genre restrictions are really helpful. Like picking a certain instrument or a certain sample. Like people do things like pick one kick drum and then make an entire song out of one kick drum. Or pick one sample, like have a friend pick a sample for you, or make a sample pack, and then you have to make a song using those samples. Those kinds of restrictions that force you to be creative inside of a box are probably the best thing to become not only a better producer, but also get past those like walls that you hit when you're struggling. So I found that like the times when I'm really feeling my music production skills and I'm really enjoying it, like 4 or 5 times a week, I'll sit down and do like a 2-hour long song. And that way it's like Monday through Thursday, it's like, okay, every day I'm working on a song. And then I get a few days off in case I like am busy, or work gets in the way, or life gets in the way. So you don't need to do it every day. But if you did that, 4 2-hour songs a week for like 2 months, your brain would just get in production mode and you'd get past a lot of those blocks. I think that's something I found works pretty well. So yeah, those are the big things. Creative restrictions. The comparison I always make with creative restrictions is artists like Picasso, for example. He had a blue period where he only painted using the color blue for like 3 or 4 years. And it forces you to do 2 things. It forces you to number one, really understand that color really well. Like you understand the color blue inside and out, because you know how to work it in shadows and in light and all the different ways you can use blue. And then it also forces you to look at things differently, right? If you're doing a painting and you can only use the color blue, then you have to get creative in terms of how you interpret that image, or how you kind of create that thing. So creative restrictions can be really, really valuable. And I think it doesn't get talked a lot about when it comes to music production. So hopefully that's helpful. Hopefully that helps you out. Restrictions, deadlines, and then detaching yourself from results is a big one. Because if you get too caught up in being results oriented, then it's too stressful. And then I personally never end up making anything because of that. So hopefully that's useful. Hopefully that helps you out. Hopefully that kind of answers your question a little bit. There's lots of different things you can do to deal with writer's block. And it really kind of depends on the person and what they're going through. The other thing that actually is really helpful is just taking a break. Just like go for a walk outside, do something else for a minute, and then come back and see if that helps. Like, don't take a break for like forever, but or a really long time. But like, if it stresses you out and it's causing you more stress than what you're benefiting from it, like do something else. Like stay away from the computer for a minute. Like go outside for a couple of days. Like have a different hobby. You know, do something else you like. Hang out with friends, and that's a great way to kind of like hit the reset button a little bit. Yeah, spending a lot of time on sound selection can be can really slow you down, and that's why having the timing deadlines, like a 1 hour time deadline, you're like, I don't have time to spend 30 minutes searching for samples. I just have to like get something and go. Also, like just file management in terms of like your sample selection can be really helpful. Like if you have a really good file management system and you have presets and you have things ready to go, you don't need to scroll through kick drums to find the perfect kick drum. You have your folder of your top 20 favorite kick drums and you just pick one and you go. And then placeholders are another thing that's really helpful. Have a placeholder drum beat, and then because one of the big things I see people run into is they'll spend 2 hours producing the perfect drum loop, and then they never end up finishing the song. Where they could spend 10 minutes making the drum loop, produce the rest of the song, and if they like the song, then they go back in and then they spend hours and hours working on the drum beat and everything to make it all perfect. Like using placeholders to get started is not only valid, it's a totally viable option for getting ideas moving and getting some momentum. I do that quite a bit now, is just plug in some drums, move on to the next thing. Don't spend 2 hours working on drums right off the bat because you lose that momentum. And then once you lose momentum with the track, it's really hard to get it back. Cool. That's a fantastic question. That's definitely something I could probably spend hours talking about, just writer's block and the creative process and all that kind of stuff. I'll probably end up making some videos about it for the channel in the near future. But I think I'm going to call it here. This is about as late as I was planning on streaming for today. I really appreciate you guys for showing up and hanging out, and I apologize for the mic issues I was having. I'm pretty sure it was a CPU thing that was causing it, but I'll have to figure out how to deal with it because I am enjoying doing these streams here on YouTube, and I'll probably continue to do them. Most likely Tuesdays and Fridays are probably when I'll do them, but I have not yet settled on a time yet. But I'm going to keep doing this in addition to all the other videos and content I'm releasing for the channel. So I appreciate you guys for showing up, and if anybody's watching this video in the future, the whole recording will be on the channel, so you can just look it up and you can watch and review any of the stuff I was talking about early in the stream. So thanks you guys, and feel free to hit me up. Let me know if you have ideas for how I can make the stream better, how I can make the channel better, topics for videos in the future. Just let me know. Cool. So have a good weekend and try making some songs with some creative restrictions on yourself. Another good one is making a song that is only drums, like just using drums, or making a song that doesn't have any drums. If you're somebody who you're really good at making beats, but you're struggling making chord progressions, make an ambient track. That kind of stuff is really useful. Sweet. So yeah, I'll see you guys on Tuesday, probably for another stream. I don't know when. I'll probably post about it in the future, but yeah, I'll see you.